Welcome to the TRT World Forum Expert Roundtable on Great Power Competition in the Balkans. My name is Şener Aktürk. I'm an Associate Professor of International Relations at Koç University in Istanbul and a Senior Fellow at TRT World Research Center. We have 4 distinguished speakers and 4 distinguished discussants in today's Expert Roundtable. Let me introduce our speakers in the order that they appear in the program, and then we will turn to their opening speeches. First, Ivo Josipović, former president of Croatia, followed by Vesko Garčević, former ambassador of Montenegro to NATO, OSCE, and a professor at Boston University. Then Marton Ogrosti, a director of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade in Hungary. And finally, Emir Suljagić, academic at the International University of Sarajevo and the director of the Srebrenica Memorial Center. Welcome to TRT World Forum. I will turn the floor to our distinguished speakers just to remind some of the ground rules that all the speakers and discussants are probably aware of. My role is primarily to be the guardian of time. Therefore, I would kindly ask the opening speeches to be roughly 8 minutes for our speakers, and then we will turn to 8 discussants, each of which will speak roughly for about 6 minutes with their questions and comments. And if it lasts shorter, then we will have more time in the last 5 or 10 minutes for a reply or second round. Thank you very much. Without any further ado, I turn the floor to Mr. Ivo Josipović.
So, hello to everyone. Thank you, organizers, for inviting me. I have some experience with your forum. It's very nice, very good occasion to present our views on different issues. So, I would like to stress that the Balkans is in permanent crisis. That means still the fight for the peace and soul of that region is online. So, definitely, big powers are included and they are fighting for their interest in the region. But I would like to stress something. I would like to stress that, of course, the big powers are fighting, they have their interest, but the main responsibility for the peace and for the future of the region is on the local politicians. So we witnessed what happened during the war. I heard for many times that some big powers influenced and they arranged the war in our region. That's not true. The war and the biggest problem in the region comes from the region, from nationalistic policy and from incompetent leadership in the region. So definitely we should have this in our minds, discussing about situation in the region and the role of big power. Firstly, I will try to mention that economical interests are also very important. Definitely, it's very important for big powers to be involved in the region due to their economical interest and political influence. Primarily, it's energy now, especially in countries of Yugoslavia. It's very important now for them to choose between Russia and the United States. They compete politically and economically as well. Then there are many political issues visibly very, very presently in Bosnia and Herzegovina because there are different issues about they are fighting in a beautiful and friendly country. And of course, now we have recent issues in Montenegro as well. So the main dilemma now is whether those countries are going to join the European Union or they are going to stay in an area of Russian influence, not only Russian, but primarily Russian influence. What is the reason to choose European Union? European Union is the most successful peace project in human history. Many people consider it as pure economical project. That means, okay, we are going to have some money from their budgets and so and so. But for me, and I think historically it's proven, European Union is the most important peace project. That means that joining European Union, we have quite big guarantees that there will be no war in the region again, because Balkans is famous about wars during the history. So I'm very in favor of a European future of all countries rising from former Yugoslavia. And during my presidency, I did everything I could to support, especially Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, Montenegro, on their European way. Unfortunately, this possibility is now somehow stopped for different reasons, but something must be understood. Definitely, it's not just pure will of European Union to accept someone. Definitely, countries willing or wishing to join European Union must understand that they really must perform important reforms. And no one will accept them just because it's very important to have them in the European Union. But they have to adapt their political, economical system, not to be something as a foreign body in frames of European Union. Now it's very important to understand also that democratic reforms in all countries should be very visible. That means that democratic governments should be in power, and that some criteria, especially respecting minority rights in some countries, it's very important. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's a very specific issue because they have in Bosnia and Herzegovina 3 so-called constitutive nations, and they fight about their equality and so on. And I never wanted to enter in their internal fights. They have to resolve it themselves, and it's very important to understand. So when we think about foreign powers, big powers, trying to attach countries in the region to their space, definitely it's a big fight between West and East, between the United States, European Union from one side, and Russia from the other. There is also China now very interested to be present in the region, and they are present more and more, but dominantly their interest is economical interest, not purely political interest. And I have to stress that China appeared itself as a very correct partner, especially towards Central European countries, and even Croatia, which is now a member of European Union. We have very good cooperation with China. That's not always welcomed in some competing countries, especially in the United States. But definitely, I think that being part of the total world, we should care not only about strategic interest of one or the other blocks or countries, but we have to take care about our national interest, our economical interest. Energy is the best example, because now we are fighting with politically welcomed energy from the United States or some other countries, and cheaper energy from Russia. And I think this dichotomy should be somehow resolved by governments, especially by Western governments. So for the beginning, that will be my contribution. I would like to stress for the end of my contribution that main responsibility for development and future of particular countries is not on big powers, it's on local governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Josipović, both for your insightful comments and also for keeping to the time. Next, we turn to our next distinguished speaker, Mr. Vesko Garčević, former ambassador of Montenegro to NATO and professor at Boston University. Mr. Garčević, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I also want to welcome everybody, and I'm thankful for the invitation and the chance to participate in this August forum. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I would like to set a stage for a discussion and to discuss a little bit about trends, ongoing trends, keeping in mind or keeping in focus foreign powers which are active in the region. I agree with what the previous speaker said, that first of all, is responsibility of countries from the region to keep on doing reforms and to be focused on further development and sustainable development of the region. But nevertheless, we cannot exclude the role of big powers. I would say there are four major external players in the region: the European Union, US, Russia, and China, with distinctive presence, and their involvement makes enduring but different consequences for the region. It can be favorable for aspirations of the region to become members of the European Union and to reform themselves, and it can be also disadvantages for the establishment of conducive political landscape in the region. Let me briefly just comment on the role of the European Union and the US. I would like to highlight here that I see for 15 years now, almost since since the beginning of financial crisis, two-way trends. At one hand, we can notice recorded the retreat of the European Union and the US from the region. At the same time, we can notice the advance of China and Russia in the region. As to the US, with the fall of Milosevic's regime back in time, and the Thessaloniki Agenda, which was adopted in 2003, and which guaranteed the clear European Union perspective to countries from the region, I would say in Washington's eyes, region has become or became a cup of tea of the European Union. Therefore, their presence was not as robust as it had been before it. When it comes to European Union, the years of really heavy enthusiasm and engagement, which I can call the time of optimism, and I can attribute to the first decade of the 21st century, were replaced with, let's say, years of realism that followed the financial crisis in the European Union, number of issues that European Union should deal with, the internal issues, as well as, it followed the last round of enlargement with inclusion of Bulgaria, Romania, and finally Croatia. I don't want to say that enlargement is not on the agenda of European Union anymore, but is not high on agenda of European Union, and that made countries from the region believe that they are sidelined and they are not anymore in focus of Brussels as it used to be the case before. This European enlargement fatigue, as some describe it, was followed by a reform fatigue. To be honest, regional elites, political elites, have never been, enthusiastic of democratic reforms back home. But with the strong presence of the European Union, they embarked upon democratic reforms and democratic process of reformation. Not having the European Union actively involved mean that we can now witness three processes going on in parallel. Actually, this development has opened the space for the rise of authoritarianism in the region. Then, the revival of nationalism and populism and aspirations for redistribution of power in the region or redrawing of the regional maps, often presented as the ideas of territorial swaps or territorial accommodations. Furthermore, this trend actually opened door for growing influence of Russia and China in the region. So, and this I have to say that Russia and China don't have the same approach when it comes to how they deal with region, but both, I would say, exploit loopholes that I just explained to advance their presence. First of all, they exploit growing discontent of countries with the European Union and the US. Secondly, they exploit, countries' economic and in some cases military needs. Then they play well on democratic incapacity and institutional instability of countries, as well as corruption present in the region. While Russia historically has been around for centuries and has many tools to be involved in the region, ranging from, let's say, church, role of Serbian Orthodox Church is particularly important to understand the development in the region, but also culture, language, and history. While Russia has been present for centuries, as I just mentioned, Beijing is, China advances the new phenomena. And as a previous speaker said, China plays on economic card because the money short economies in the region are in dire need for money, and soft loans given by China in their eyes are perceived as easy money, and they take those money not being aware of what consequences are. I will say that though economic motive of China is visible, it may have political consequence. And one of the most vulnerable countries in the region is country I come from, Montenegro, which at this point, has 40% ratio of its debt to China's lenders. So it makes it extremely vulnerable economically and politically because of soft loans received from China's lenders. So trends are not, in my view, so optimistic. What may come in the future, I will leave for the second part of discussion. Many people in the region believe that with Biden's victory in the U.S. and more coordinating approach between the European Union and the U.S., region can get another chance to reinvigorate economic and democratic reforms and to get its European Union agenda reinforced in the years to come. I will stop here. I hope that I didn't go over my time, and I'm thankful again for giving me a chance to share my thoughts with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garčević. You were exactly on time, and in fact, 30 seconds before your time. Thank you for these insightful comments. And we now turn to Mr. Marton Ogrosti, Director of the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Hungary. Mr. Ogrosti, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, my good friend, Ambassador Laszlo Markus, asked me to say his best regards, convey his best regards to Leo Malazolo, who's listening more than the other end. A couple of points I would like to follow up upon on which Ambassador Garčević said. First of all, I very much agree with his assessment that the United States has basically outsourced the Western Balkans to the European Union. And if you ask me, the European Union and the European communities before that has failed miserably when it comes to maintaining peace and economic prosperity on the Western Balkans. And the US was always dragged back into this theater. And in a very American way, they applied their own principles, they applied their own interests. But whether that made the situation of Southeast Europe better when it comes to economic stability and security is a question that we might rightfully ask. What I would like to talk about at length is the credibility of the European Union on the Western Balkans and in Southeast Europe in general. Because what we have seen that there were many agreements, many joint summits, many papers signed, but apart from a few countries, we haven't seen any kind of significant and tangible process when it comes to EU integration. And I think the European Union is also partly to blame for this because, just as Ambassador Garčević said, there's a great amount of enlargement fatigue when it comes to the internal dynamics of the European Union. There is a feeling of regret, if you wish, especially in the founding member states, that the EU was enlarged at such a rapid pace after 2004. And I think by now it became visible that by granting accession to so many countries at the same time, that kind of common thinking and common understanding, which was characterizing the European Union, and especially the core countries, is very much different right now. And I think this is part of the reasons that we're having these very political debates about the future of the EU. This is why we have disagreements on the next generation EU funds. This is why we have political debates on the political questions. For a long time, this was not the case in the EU, because most of the governments of the then member states were basically on the same page when it came to the real painful political questions, like whether migration is a solution to the decreasing population. What is the ideal level of redistribution of wealth within a country or within the European Union, for example? So these very questions, touching upon the very basics of our society and economy, are now on the forefront and the surface. And finally, we have political debate on the level of the EU about these political questions. And this has a detrimental impact on both the EU's standing in the world and also in its capacity to continue the enlargement process. I think I'm not going to surprise anyone by saying that Central and Eastern European countries, Hungary included, would be very much interested in further EU and NATO enlargement. NATO has been more of a success story because we've seen that roughly all of the countries which wanted to join NATO recently in the Western Balkans actually did so. But if we look at the EU enlargement process, it's absolutely not that encouraging. And what is even more problematic, that we do not have any credible target dates for enlargement at the moment. And if I look at the problems that both President Josipović and Ambassador Garčević was mentioning about the state of democracy, corruption, state capture, and so on and so forth, if we look at the experience of Central European countries, we see that the prospect of enlargement, the prospect of accession, and all the legal reforms which were required as part of the accession process were the major driving force that changed the legal, the judicial, and the democratic system in Central and Eastern European countries. Now, as it became very obvious from the side of the European Union, and President Jean-Claude Juncker said it outright, that there's not going to be any kind of enlargement in the near future, how the EU could persuade these countries to move ahead with reforms if there's no reward inside. I mean, we do not have any meaningful incentives for the Western Balkan countries to make these very painful reforms. And if I look at the case of Albania, for example, where the vetting process of the judiciary led to the resignation of 60% of the judges and prosecutors, I mean, these are painful changes. This is changing the status quo in these countries. Also, it changes the structure of the political elite. And if there's no point making that, because there won't be any kind of EU accession, there won't be any disbursements of EU funds, nobody's going to do that. And I can feel the pain, because for them, for the elites, this is the rational thing to do. So they're not going to jeopardize their position for some promises which will not be kept. And this is, I think, why the EU, despite all the major impact it has, especially in the field of economy, and also if I look at the number of guest workers from the Western Balkan countries working in EU member states legally or illegally, that's not so important at the moment. The bond is already there. So we cannot say that the EU is an outsider to the affairs of the Western Balkans, because we have so many ties that is basically making the EU the most powerful actor on the ground. But it is perceived as the least powerful actor, especially if we compare it to the United States, Russia, China, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran maybe as well. Despite the fact that if you look at the foreign trade structure of the Western Balkans countries, predominantly they're trading with the European Union. Most of the investment is coming from the European Union. And it's not a surprise that the EU is interested in preserving peace and stability on the Western Balkans, because this is a prime investment target for the EU countries. And if these companies do not have to be afraid of war and ethnic strife and any kind of conflicts, if the business environment is stable, they will be even more inclined to invest in these countries. And that indirectly can lead to a much better integration with the single market and the Western Balkans countries. So summing up, just to keep to the time limit, I would like to say that the EU is facing a credibility crisis on the Western Balkans. And I do not really see that that this is going to be restored, because as long as the EU member states and the intra-EU stakeholders keep debating among themselves that whether the deepening of the European Union or the enlargement of the European Union is more important, and as long as we're more inclined towards deepening, something like the French, the Dutch, and partly the southern member states would like to do first, then we won't have any credible pathway towards enlargement, and we will be unable to draw the Western Balkans countries into our orbit, because there will be no incentives. There will be many costs associated with the accession process, but no incentives on the other, and no rational people on the sides of coming from the elites of these countries will make that very far step to keep to the road which leads to EU enlargement if we're not offering anything in return. Thank you very much. I will stop here and be happy to answer the questions later on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ugrosdy, which brings us to our fourth and final speaker before we turn to the discussion, Mr. Emir Suljagić, an academic at the International University of Sarajevo and also the director of the Srebrenica Memorial Center. Mr. Suljagić, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me wish you all a good afternoon, especially to my friends Vesko Garčević here and Hamza Garčić panel as well from the University of Sarajevo. Let me use the 5 to 8 minutes that I have to, and I'd like to use it to talk a little bit more about actual Russian actions, especially in Bosnia, and some of their implications for the region. But let me start with a personal anecdote. 5 years ago, in 2015, I served very briefly as a Deputy Minister of Defense of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in that period, we were in the process of fulfilling conditions for Bosnia's membership action plan to be activated. It involved a rather complex and complicated registration of immovable property. And as we got more successful in that process, and sometime in May or June, the Russian ambassador asked to speak with the minister and the 2 deputies. Now, we were all surprised. The Bosnian Defense Ministry is known in the country as the American project. No Russian ambassador has ever visited the Ministry of Defense or any unit of the Bosnian Armed Forces. Anyway, so we accepted the meeting, and it was one of the ugliest and the shortest meetings I've ever attended in my political career. The Russian ambassador sat across the table from us and said, and I'm going to quote this because I'll remember this sentence the day I die. He said, whereas we see some stabilizing influence from Bosnia's EU membership, we see no perspective in Bosnia's NATO membership. Now, this is the Russian ambassador, right? This is not an ambassador of a country that's in the same rank with Bosnia. It's a statement coming from a completely different planet in international relations, right? And I was concerned. I remember making calls to our Western friends, our Turkish friends, everybody, telling them what's going on and asking what we should do. Now, a month after that meeting, the Russian ambassador, the then Russian ambassador to the UN Security Council, the late Vitaly Churkin, vetoed on behalf of Russia a symbolic resolution of the UN Security Council proposed by the United Kingdom calling Srebrenica a genocide. Few months after that, I left the government, but together with some friends, I've kept an eye on what Russian government doing here. And we do not conflate. When I say Russian, I mean the government. I'm a great fan of the Russian culture. I read Tolstoy when I was 14, and it was mandated. So now, if we look at the title of the session, it's the great power competition, but there is really no competition on the ground. To the extent that there is competition, it's very much one-sided. Going back to 2006, what we would colloquially call the West, the international community, whatever, took a backseat after another failed attempt to form the constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it created a vacuum. And vacuum is not a natural state of affairs either in nature or in international relations or in politics. Now, that vacuum was filled by other actors, and most important of those actors was and continues to be Russia. Only a month ago, for instance, and this part of the world plays an important role in whatever the Russian strategy overall is. Only a month ago, one of the leading Bosnian investigative news sites published an article that conclusively showed that one of the disinformation centers in relation to the U.S. elections was actually based in Belgrade, or actually in Zemun, just outside Belgrade, but it was based in Serbia. We see Russian influence manifested in the security sector, in the energy sector, and in my mind, most importantly, in the information or disinformation sector. Societies in the Western Balkans, Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, are very vulnerable to disinformation. In fact, if you take a look at the Open Society Index, it actually lists these countries as some of the most vulnerable. Open Society Institute's Media Literacy Index lists Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, Bosnia, Albania, and Macedonia as the European states least equipped to identify and push back at fake news. In other words, this part of the world is now capital fake news. And with media outlets such as Sputnik and others, very active here, they're using every opportunity to deepen the already deep and existing divisions within the region and within countries, within every particular country. We could see that in in the elections in Montenegro that were held in September. We could see even more of a sort of hard power Russian influence back in, and Vesko, please correct me, back in 2016, right, with the coup d'etat attempt. We also see very significant Russian influence when it comes to finance. And interestingly enough, what has gone almost completely unnoticed is the economic footprint that the Russian finance sector is leaving in Croatia, especially with Agrokor going belly up, and Russian banks, Russian state-owned banks, coming in to patch up and essentially owning one of the biggest companies in the Balkans that serves the entirety, if you will, or almost the entirety of the Croatian tourism and Croatian tourists. The other really important aspect of this Russian influence is the security. A few years ago, two colleagues and I wrote a report that was published by Foreign Policy Research Institute showing very extensive links between Russian government and Russian proxies and a spate of paramilitary groups that are connected to a variety of actors in both Bosnia and Serbia. We've had a very high-profile visit of the what are they called, night wolves, and so on. So when you put these things, sort of when you look at them in combination, if we try and see a strategy behind it, what comes to mind, and this is my position, is that Russia is actually actively trying to keep the Western Balkans destabilized in the belief that the EU and the US, that are very risk averse, let alone the possibility of a conflict, that they will actually that the US and the EU will not get involved, and that these countries will not become integrated into Western institutions, that they will not become members of the EU and NATO. When it comes to the EU, it's I'm going to repeat this trope that was used to describe Germany back in the early 90s about economic giant and political dwarf. If you take a look at the sheer amount of money that the EU is spending here, it's completely mind-boggling that they wouldn't act harder to protect their own investment, and that's or the US, and that's something that with the 4 years behind us, we also had a U.S. administration that was very inactive, that started dabbling in the Balkans only recently. That also failed with this idea of land swaps and border corrections. Now, we don't know what's going to happen, right? And a lot is expected from the new U.S. administration, how it's going to what's going to happen there, how the new administration is going to work with the EU and other actors is a different story. What worries me already is this trope about the U.S. leading from behind, again, that I'm hearing from some Brussels-based analysts. And we know what leading from behind actually led to back in the 90s and in the early 2000s. And I'm going to stop here. I guess I'm already past my time. Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suljagić, for these thought-provoking comments and anecdotes. Now is the time to transition to the discussant comments. We have 8 distinguished discussants. Ideally, we allow up to 6 minutes for questions and comments.
Yes. Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
So I was informed that Mr. Garčević and Mr. Ugrosdy have follow-up comments. Yes, Mr. Garčević.
I just wanted to make a comment on so-called the credibility crisis of the European Union, which was mentioned by my colleague Ogrosti here, from the perspective of countries aspiring to become members of the European Union. I remember when I was in diplomatic service of my country, how Brussels taught us rightly that our achievements are to be judged by our deeds, not by our words. So if we judge by deeds of Brussels lately, so then we really can have doubts about whether European enlargement or European membership, European Union membership is still a perspective of the countries of the Western Balkans. Look at what happened with North Macedonia and Albania or Kosovo when it comes to visa liberalization. Kosovo delivered everything what is needed to get visa liberalization. Albania and North Macedonia delivered everything what Brussels asked them to do to be able to open accession negotiation talks. Just to hear and to see how Netherlands or France put the process on hold. I want to make another comment, is that the membership to the European Union was a strong incentive for democratic reforms in the countries of the Western Balkans. Lacking that perspective in a foreseeable future, I'm afraid that we're going to witness the further rise of authoritarianism in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garčević. So now we are transitioning to discussants' questions and comments. We have about 5 to 6 minutes, up to 5 to 6 minutes per discussant, comment, and question. As we transition to that, I want to mention just one question that came to mind, especially following up on the anecdote that Mr. Suljagić communicated and the comments about Russian influence. I also teach Soviet and post-Soviet politics, ethnic politics and nationalism here in Istanbul. Following up on what happened in Georgia and South Ossetia in 2008, and in Crimea and Ukraine in 2014, and the Russian intervention in Syria in September 2015. Some of us, including myself, thought that the Western alliance, despite the Budapest Memorandum and so on and so forth about Ukrainian territorial integrity, did not intervene on behalf of Georgia, Ukraine, or the Free Syrian Opposition. So does this mean a redrawing of spheres of influence between Russia and the West? Did the Western alliance, to a certain extent, concede the Black Sea Basin, Syria, and or Georgia, in this case, to Russian influence? And whether, directly following up on what Mr. Suljagić said, could there be a repetition of this pattern in the West Balkans, what has happened partially in Georgia, Ukraine, and Syria? That would be my only 60-second question. And without further ado, I'd like to move on to our first discussant. We'll go in the order that the names are listed in the program. Mr. Yue, the former ambassador of China to Qatar, Jordan, and Ireland. The floor is yours, Mr. Yue.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Mr. Aktak. And it's a great honor to attend this wonderful meeting. And I did it last year in Turkey, in Istanbul, and I saw some very good friends, old friends, former President Ivo and others. And how are you? And thank you for the meeting and the forum to give me this opportunity. And I listened very, very attentively to all the great speakers, good speakers' presentation, which are very enlightening and a good education for me for this region. And I want to make this, take this opportunity to make a comment and then raise questions. And my major point is, thank you for a lot of speakers now mentioning China as outside the power to this region. For China, I think our way of thinking, we don't follow the traditional power politics thinking that we are sort of power in an old geopolitical sense. I think number one, as you all know, China, we look at the global situation in a way still we're cautiously optimistic about the globe, even though we have the unilateralism, the negative trends for the globalization, for the liberalization of the trade. We still believe the major trend in the world and in the region, in the world, in Europe, in European Union and in Europe, most countries want to have longer peace and want to have opportunity to develop, to have the economic growth and to have a better life. Number two, China itself, ourselves, we want to act as one to better maintain this peaceful situation and this cooperation and this development situation. Number three, and China look at this region either as a Balkan states, I counted 11 of them in the larger sense, or 6 or 5 of them in this narrow sense, or as a European Union. We attach more and more importance to this Balkan region and the European Union as a force together with China, with other countries, to maintain this peaceful situation in the world and the development situation in the world. So in this situation, I saw some very good comments now, presentation made by the speakers. I really much for it. That is, China in this region, in the Balkans, we look forward to share the opportunities with the countries of this region, together with China, to enjoy the common development and prosperity with China. As you know, we are proceeded with the negotiation with the European Union about the bilateral direct investment. We really hope we can reach the agreement by the end of this year. We are very active. And number two, we are very active in enlarge our already signed the CREP, the liberalization, the free trade agreement. We just did it with our Asia and Pacific partners, 12 of them. So we want to enlarge this opportunity with the region. And as you all know, I check up all the countries in these Balkan states. China is doing more with these regional countries to have a better condition and a better situation for our common economic and social development. My question, enlightened by the speakers now, that is, we are very interested in knowing a more stable and prosperous Europe and the prosperous and ongoing advancement of European Union unity and prosperity. So one thing is I personally also interested in look at this Brexit. What is Brexit will further influence upon this region or the European process as a whole. Another thing is about this, what so-called power competition in the region. This is not a narrative of China. I think in a larger sense, it's some narrative from some forces in America. They try to, or in some others, they try to create something like there are power politics like another America, another Soviet Union to play things here. But this is somewhat narrative. We say they create some threat, some country's threat for that. So the people want to aim that threat. For China, we think so long as all the countries act in accordance with the United Nations Charter, we united as equality and we consult, dialogue each other, we can solve the problem better. We can build the world better instead of just play the narrative of some threat. Of course, lastly, also as a question that how these other local, historically left unstable, unskilled factors in these Balkans will have influence. We hope the internal affairs in this region really can be solved by the internal countries, by your wisdom and by your own power. And we will refrain from any intervention into internal affairs of this region and of the countries specifically. And we hope you will, together with the international community, with the European Union, this region can have a more secure, more stable situation in the years and the months to come. And for China, we want to continue to be a positive and constructive force with you and with all the, including the Middle and Eastern European countries. I noticed we'll have the Hungarian friend here too, and from all the way from Turkey. You see, part of Turkey is also Balkans, all the way from Croatia here. We see a lot of opportunities. We share this.
Mr. Yue, if we can wrap up.
Yeah, to sum up, that is China.
Yes,
I want to emphasize China, together with my questions and my presentation, that China is a constructive and peaceful country, and you call it as a force, together with these regional countries, to build up a more secure, prosperous, stable region, together with the Europeans and with other powers, even including United States and Russia, and especially with the European Union. And I personally, I trust that this year, and together with next year, as we have a better vaccine against the COVID-19, we will have a better picture of the relations between China and the Balkan states. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Now we turn to Mr. Leon Malazolo, the former ambassador of the Republic of Kosovo to Japan and the executive director of Democracy and Development Institute. Mr. Malazolo, the floor is yours. You have up to 5-6 minutes for questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is great to be at such a distinguished forum, and also happy to reconnect with some of the friends from the region and make new friends and among the discussants and the speakers. Let me start on a funny note a little bit. I cannot help but think of how the Balkans has been a crossroad from the ancient times, but also mixed with a bit of a fake story all along. I think last time I was in Croatia, I was told that Marco Polo did not actually bring the spices from China. He was actually buying them in Istanbul and would sell them in Venice. So in a way, the region has always been a bit of a go in between, but not necessarily also being using and a bit abusing that relationship, and also being abused at the same time as well. On this note, it is interesting to note on one of the questions that you posed at the beginning is, can this be an advantage for the Balkans? And I would say so far, only Serbia has really used it to its advantage. It's because it is able to bring Russia and China into the mix, and this clearly being seen as a major threat by the West. But it's interesting also to see the reaction from the West. It has sought, in a way, to buy out Serbia, in a way to try to please Serbia as much as possible, which has at the same time only increased this antagonistic relationship, or this also almost like a bullying behavior, because the more that the West tries to appease this behavior, also other countries risk saying, oh, but what about us? We fully commit to the West. We fully want to join democracy, but then we don't get any even a small fraction of the kind of attention that Serbia gets. On this note, also, I think I agree with virtually everything that was said before, except one. It's a bit of a tantra, kind of a mantra to really all the time accuse the EU of not offering membership to the countries, or delaying the integration, and using this as the vacuum. I fully agree that both the US withdrawal, so to say, about 2 decades ago and leaving it to the European Union, and EU's not really ability to act has created vacuum for alternative sources of attraction. At the same time, personally, I think these countries have not been ready to join the EU, and I would not expect the EU to lower the standards to have these countries join. But what I do expect is for EU to act kind of like a regional hegemon, to act as a major power, which it has not. I think several speakers before this said that the EU has spent billions, by far more than any other country, but has gotten really little political mileage in exchange for this, and I fully agree. And also somebody said that it's up to the people of the Balkans, and I would agree with that, but the democratic social capital in the region is so weak. So the only way for this region to move towards the West most faster is for the EU to act as a proper superpower as it should. I'm not surprised by the behavior of Russia and China, as we often, or almost even giving a moral judgment. Russia and China are doing what everyone would expect them to do. They behave as a rational actor, furthering their own interest. The problem is that Europe's underbelly, in this case, is not only the Balkans. The Russian and Chinese influence is very strong inside the European Union as well. And it manifests in Europe's inability to decide and move. And Kosovo is a clear case. Despite what happened in the 90s, you have misgivings, you have countries which really hesitate to, your EU members. And this has really been the major factor combined with the appeasing of Serbia. And this appeasement has really enabled all these external factors to be much more influential. And it has stopped Bosnia from moving forward. It has now belatedly stirring trouble in Montenegro. It has empowered regressive forces in North Macedonia. And for me, it's easy to speak from Kosovo because in some ways we are in a comfortable position. We have over 90% support both joining NATO and the EU. But we feel we're not being rewarded. Quite the opposite. The countries which bully European Union and threaten with external influence get their way, at least on a tactical level. And
Mr. Malazolo, if you can wrap up in 1 minute.
Yeah, I'm adding. There's absolutely no space in the middle. I agree that countries either should move towards the EU. Or they should express clear preference for other alternative sources, but they cannot stay in the middle. Yeah, I ended.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Malazolo. Now we turn to Yekaterina Antina, professor and deputy vice rector in the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, Russia. Professor Antina, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I will be a little bit arrogant. It seems to me that we are, with this our discussion, somewhere in the middle of the past. We are discussing the same topic with the same range of arguments in the same context, at least for 7 years already. But the time is going on. The world around us is changing, and the Balkans have changed greatly during this time. And I would like to indicate several tendencies and to ask whether the international community have any response to this new stage, to this new stance of the region of Balkans and the region international system of international relations. First of all, Balkans got back their traditional, historical, trans-regional meaning, especially in the context of transport infrastructure. We see different trans-regional projects going through the territory of Southeast Europe. And it gives to the Balkans a new quality and new stance which we need to take into account. Second point, we see that political elites all around the region are changing stage by stage. But do we have with this change the new quality of these political elites? And are we ready to take into account that with the change of these elites, we need to have a new quality of people who see not, who look not only to the past in all senses, and to the past of international relations, because international relations are not the same anymore as they were 20 or 30 years ago. Third point, world economy and world trade drastically has changed, especially with the COVID, which intensified the new technological reality and the new technological evolution very much. And it changes the questions of what economy is necessary in the Balkans. And it changes drastically the question, do we need to discuss energy sector or do we need to discuss the new elements of economy, intellectual services, economy of feelings or something like that. And the third, we have to face that the regional system of international relations has changed drastically, and the ambitions of different regional actors are changed. Why do we not asking ourselves what is going on, for example, with Turkey? We see that it demonstrated its ambitions and its position in South Caucasus during the last several months. Will it have some application to the Balkans or not? It's also the question. Whether we are ready to answer all these new questions which came to the agenda during the last 5 years, or we are ready just to discuss that things which do not demand from us any intellectual effort, and to discuss where the regional European integration now in the Balkans do not demand from us any intellectual effort. It's evident where it is, and the problem is evident. But we need to tie this problem of European integration with the new stance of world economy, world international affairs, and its regional segment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Antina, also for keeping to the time. And next, we have Birgül Demirtaş, professor at Turkish German University. Professor Demirtaş, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have very short 2 comments. I think one of the important issues in the Balkans is still related to the democratization process. Yes, we have democracies in the Balkan states, but most of them are minimal democracies or procedural democracies. And only a few number of states could consolidate their democracy. And of course, it is the fact that it is the time of populism, and democratization, not only in the Balkans, but also all over the world, is going downwards. I mean, it has a downward trend. But I think democratization has relations with many things. It has relations with the economic development, with the foreign policy. Therefore, if we would like to have economic development and a peaceful foreign policy in the Balkans, I think we should stress upon the importance of the democratization process. Of course, the local actors, as already said by some of the speakers, I mean, they have their responsibility for the democratization process. This is my first comment. And my second comment is related to the importance of history in the Balkans. History is still alive in the Balkans. I mean, there is still the ghost of history. And the recent problem between Serbia and Montenegro in the recent days is still proof that even just one word can be quite sensitive for different nations, and it can create diplomatic problems. I mean, I have been working on the Balkans for some years, and whenever I talk to my Balkan friends, whether to Bosniak friends, Croatian, Albanian, or Serbian, it doesn't make a difference. Whenever we talk about the wars in the 1990s, what I see is that still the wars of the 1990s have not been done enough by the Balkan nations. Each nation still sees itself as the victim. Either there are conspiracy theories, I mean, the external actors created the wars, as already stated by Mr. Josipović, or each side accuses the others of what happened in the 1990s. I mean, that creates many problems among the Balkan states. I think we need a kind of a healthy discussion about the past in the Balkans. I mean, we see it from the history of Europe that in order to have a peaceful region, in order to have a permanent peace, the past has to be dealt with, so to say. Today we have a permanent, we can say, between France and Germany, because each side has taken its responsibility. That is not the case in the Balkans. I mean, the problem of dealing with the past, not taking any responsibility, not self-criticizing itself, I think that creates many political problems in the region, and that has also repercussions for the foreign policy as well. And if any of the speakers would like to comment on these 2 points, I would be happy to hear their comments as well.
Thank you very much, Professor Demirtas. Thank you very much also for keeping to the time and for your insightful questions. From the speakers, Mr. Josipović would like to comment on these issues. Mr. Josipović, the floor is yours.
Yes, I would like to comment on thesis that United States outsourced the problem of Balkan countries to European Union. That's the fact, of course. United States imposed Dayton Agreement to finish the war. It was successful finishing the war, but unfortunately it caused many internal troubles in Bosnia and Herzegovina after the war. It's very easy to tell someone, okay, I'm outsourcing the problem to you, but you are going to pay the price. New European, possibly new European countries burdened by nationalism, by corruption, but by dysfunctional governments are not going to be 51st or 57th country of United States. They're going to be the states of European Union. That means their problem will burden European Union. So they have a responsibility to change themselves. They cannot have position, okay, we would like to have European money, European support, but we are not going to deliver fight against corruption. We are not going to quit our nationalism. We are not going to quit our fights. It's not possible. Let's be realistic. I think that much more angriness should be in Turkey than in some Balkan countries because of some kind of postponement of enlargement policy in European Union. Because the problems of those countries are so huge that it's really questionable whether European Union should accept this type of states with so big problems. It's very important interest of Croatia to have all our neighbors in European Union. We are supporting them. We are trying to help them. But if someone don't want to do something about their internal problems, how can you help them? So my position is that the European Union should motivate changement in the region, should motivate people to quit nationalism, to quit corruption, and to fight for some European values. Probably European Union and the United States were not efficient enough to motivate or to help political forces fighting for these European values. But unfortunately, those European values are not now accepted by some of those countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Josipović, for your comment. We turn to our next distinguished discussant, Hamza Garčević, who is a professor at the University of Sarajevo. Professor Garčević, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shair Bey. I have 2 comments, and since we have spoken much about the European Union, let me put out 2 arguments here. One is I agree with Mr. Ugrosdy that with the waning European membership prospects, both Europe's influence wanes in the region, which is a no-brainer, but also what wanes is any incentive for the regional countries to move forward. And this applies to Bosnia, but this also applies to recent and new member states, which both have joined the EU but haven't, absorbed all the European values, including our neighboring countries, neighbors of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, what's a distinct possibility and a likely scenario is that they're going to have, with the waning European Union prospect for Bosnia, and if Serbia joins the EU quicker than Bosnia, which is quite likely, then they're going to have the tactic that has been applied over the years, which we may call block your neighbor tactic. So Italy blocked Slovenia. At one point, Slovenia blocked Croatia. Croatia is blocking Serbia and has been doing its utmost to block Bosnia. And even a few years ago, Croatia's social democratic prime minister blocked the export of Bosnian milk outside of Bosnia. So if somebody blocks you on the export of milk, you can imagine what level of blockades we can expect as we move forward to something far more important than milk. And then if Serbia joins the EU quicker than Bosnia, Bosnia will end up, which is a likely scenario that we're moving towards, having two neighbors which leverage their EU membership and then use their position within the EU to apply pressure on Bosnia from the position of EU member countries, and then try to preach that what their national interests are is actually their national interests are being camouflaged as European values. And so Bosnia is currently faced with the potential veto of Croatia, which is quite likely. Something like Bulgaria did to North Macedonia, we expect Croatia to do that to Bosnia. But now also with Serbia moving quicker than Bosnia, they are very likely faced with two-level blockades. Now, please also bear in mind that we have to be realistic that Bosnian Serbs will get a Serbian citizenship, so EU work permits, EU citizenship. Bosnian Croats who opt to get Croatian citizenship will end up getting the work permits, all the benefits of EU membership. So blocking Bosnia and undermining Bosnia only effectively means that Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims, will be left in a limbo. So this is the vacuum that we have noticed and that we are very concerned about. So this regional pressure, if the tactic was used over the years, and it just recently Bulgaria did it to North Macedonia, then obviously there has to be found a way for Germany and France, especially Germany, to try to block regional countries from imposing their bilateral national interests and then naming it and camouflaging it as European values. This is quite a likely scenario that we are heading towards. The second comment that I have here is about Turkey, and I think except for our colleague from Russia, nobody has mentioned that Turkey is an important regional actor. And I think Turkey has played a very constructive role over the years, especially I would argue in supporting Bosnia's NATO accession. And this is what Turkey did with by supporting Bosnia's membership action plan process some 10 years ago. And along with the US, Turkey is Bosnia's crucial ally as we go towards full NATO membership. Now with the EU a distant ideal and NATO membership being blocked by Republika Srpska, I think the support of the United States, the incoming Biden administration, and the support of Turkey in fast-tracking Bosnia's NATO accession are two crucial events. I'll have some questions, but I'll leave those for the section on questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Garčević. Just a 30-second comment. I think many Turks would also follow up and say, especially when Turkey's accession talks were going very well in the early 2000s, the Greek Cypriot administration and Greece also used their EU membership status in the same way you mentioned, neighbors blocking each other from membership. I'm not saying it's necessarily the true interpretation, but it came to my mind. But there was an immediate comment question following up on your comment from our speaker. Yes. Yes,
Let me just say that I have in mind. Yes. I have in mind the Cyprus, the Annan plan, which when Turkey accepted the UN plan, Turkish Cypriots were punished with isolation, and the Greek Cypriots, which rejected it, were rewarded with full membership. So Bosniaks may end up having the same situation, that even though we try to absorb all the EU legislation, we end up on the losing side of the train towards the EU.
Mm-hmm. This is yet another thought-provoking example. There is a comment or question following up on this discussion by our speaker, Mr. Emir Suljagić, as a comment or question. The floor is yours, Mr. Suljagić. And then we'll continue.
I'm just going to make a very, all right, I apologize to everyone. I'm just going to make a very, very short comment. I completely agree with Professor Garčević here. I would only like to point out that what he's talking about is, as a possibility is actually happening as we speak. And I think that the role that Croatia has played in that regard has been particularly destructive when it comes to packaging its own aspirations towards Bosnia as EU values. And Mr. Josipović here is not very much innocent of it himself. So we should be very careful when pronouncing such big words as nationalism, this and that. I remember a time when Mr. Josipović and then the person who followed him up in the office of the president and the actual president of Croatia have been very much interfering in what, by all standards, internal affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina as a sovereign state, and packaging that as EU values. And so, you know, we should be very careful about taking moral high grounds here. You know, so, and I'll stop here because, you know, there are other people who deserve, who should talk, and I should, you know, we should give them a chance.
Okay, thank you very much for this comment as well. We have next in the list Professor Zuhal Mert Uzuner. She's a professor at Marmara University. Professor Uzuner, the floor is yours for your discussant comments, up to 5-6 minutes as you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the floor. I really enjoyed these nice presentations and talks. I thought this topic of, let's say, this session was about great power. So it is much more related with global politics, so globally important actors. So when we discuss about their roles and their policies in this region, how they're influential in this region, we should also refer to the policies about other regions. As dear Ekaterina referred this, let's say, the other actors, other roles in, let's say, in Caucasia or in other regions of the world, we see the importance of this great power politics also in Aegean Sea, in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I would like to refer also the comment about the role of Cyprus in EU. You know, they are blocking many the negotiation sessions, and they are creating real trouble in this EU accession process of Turkey, despite the efforts of Turkey for that period of time. We see that the Balkans became under influence of Russian ambitions, especially when Russians want to be an important player in the Eastern Mediterranean. And today we see again such kind of the interest of Russia, and it is creating a great reaction. And as again, from not a geopolitical perspective maybe, but from economic perspective, we see China and the control of this sea route. Today we are talking about this trading maritime routes and their security. It is a very important topic in international relations. So even EU started to be a geopolitical actor. They say this. They say we should be a strategic actor, a geopolitical actor, by playing the game according to the rules. What kind of rules they are? It's a kind of organization to play the game in Mediterranean. And what we experienced a few days ago inside this Irini operation is a reflection of that. It's like a kind of combination of this the ambitions of member states and how they can manage this existence inside this EU, and how they can create a kind of crisis in between NATO members. So I want to ask a question: what kind of role NATO can play in such kind of game? Because we are talking about NATO's role in Kosovo and in Bosnia. We see the importance of this Atlantic side of the creation of peace and prosperity in the Balkans. So when we come to the other side of this game, a race between Russia and United States, and also Russia and EU, we see the same kind of conflict in Aegean Sea. So we see that NATO plays very important role against this migration crisis. The flow of migrations took under control as a result of this Frontex regulations, and it is tightly related with NATO. And I wonder, I don't know who else who wants to answer this question from the speakers. I wonder how we see that the role of these great powers about peace and prosperity in Eastern Mediterranean and generally the Balkans, because according to me, this issue is tightly related with these balances in Eastern Mediterranean. We had a nice concept once upon a time, you know, it's Near East. And today, I think we started to talk about the same concept, how we may evaluate the role of Turkey, Russia, and NATO for peace and prospect of the Balkans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Uzuner. I realize that we might have some other replies and comments, but we have our final discussant only right now, Mehmet Uğur İkinci. Once we hear for up to 5-6 minutes from Mr. İkinci, we can turn to all the speakers for the final second round in the last 15 minutes, if that is okay with everybody. Mehmet Uğur İkinci is a researcher at the SETA Foundation Istanbul. Mr. İkinci, the floor is yours for 5 to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. By the way, I would like to just note that there is another name among the discussants from Brussels. So in case that we forget him, we should also give the floor to him. So I make my comments very quick. In my opinion, understanding current problems and potential ones in the Western Balkans through the conceptualization of great power politics may not be very accurate. I know that in the last have been a growing number of pieces by think tankers and professors about this phenomenon. But actually, today's discussion was quite telling for me, because we didn't really talk about competition among great powers today. What we mentioned rather were there were certain involvements and engagements of these external powers in the Western Balkans. Okay, but what we really touched upon were either engagement or values or competition. If we mention some matters of competition, these are parochial competitions among local actors in the region. So how I interpret this discourse is rather as such. In the last few years, the publication of pieces mentioning this are coming out mostly from European observers who are championing or supporting the EU integration or Euro-Atlantic integration of the region, which is actually still going on. But I sense that there is a question about the pace and the progress of the transformation of the region as anticipated in the early 2000s. And they want to divert the responsibility from Europe or from the current weaknesses of the European Union to other actors. Because I don't really see a categorical difference from the involvement of Russia and China and Turkey and other external actors in the Western Balkans from their involvement in countries like Greece or in Bulgaria or Cyprus, or if you talk about other countries like Turkey. But I don't see any pieces about external competition or great power competition over Turkey or over Greece or whatever. So my suggestion, if the European Union would like to ponder upon or consider how this transformation can be achieved, they should thinking more about the challenges in the current state of international affairs, living in the late 1990s or early 2000s, which had a great liberal atmosphere in the world, and it seemed like the only option of relations or political orientations would be the Western world. Today, the engagements of every country in the world with every political or economic power. So the European Union has a bigger task in front of it to transform these countries and at the same time to keep its values and its institutions within itself. So I really see the new pace of engagement of the European Union towards the Western Balkans in this year as an optimistic development. So probably they have also reconsidered new options and new policies to be implemented. At the same time, finally, I would like to make another suggestion. Instead of looking at external actors as categorically disruptive to Western of the region, I think the European Union should look at the consequences of each policies of external actors in the region. I don't think that these actors are predominantly undermining peace and stability. Actually, peace and stability of the region for the most of these external actors is also what is desired. So I think the European Union should try to cooperate or at least not alienate these actors in order to achieve peace and stability, because as far as I see, this is the main objective of European involvement in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ekinci, also for keeping to time. So we now have 14 minutes until 5 o'clock for a second round, short responses from all the speakers. So I suggest, if it's possible, each speaker could keep their comments to 3 minutes each in the same order that we had in the first round. Mr. Ivo Josipović, the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, okay. I would like to refer to Mr. Suljagić's speech because I think it's quite unfair to blame me for some aspiration from Croatia to Bosnia and Herzegovina, because I had, and I was blamed in Croatia because I had better relation with Bosniak's leader than with Croatian leader. As probably he can really recall my speech in Bosnian parliament when I said something about former Croatian policy towards Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I would like still to stress that the other countries should not be excuse for Bosnia and Herzegovina, not for Bosniaks. I'm not speaking about Bosniaks, Croats and Serbs. For me, they're equal in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's their common country. And they have to resolve their problem. And I was frequently asked by especially Bosniak news, do I prefer 3 entities or 4 entities in Bosnia and Herzegovina? My answer was always, I don't care. It's internal matter of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, corruption is internal matter of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's not guilt by Croatia or Serbia or Turkey or European Union or United States. And there are the other problems as well as ecological problems, very huge ecological problems, not only Bosnia and Herzegovina, but some other countries. So it is not wise to try to find the guilty in some other state. You have to perform your reforms and you cannot avoid it. So I don't care about your entities, about your internal relations, but you have to resolve them. Because if you don't resolve them, I'm not sure that you will do the job necessary to be accepted to the European Union. As you know, Croatia had a special program to support Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was promoted by Prime Minister Milanović. Now he's doing something probably different, by Foreign Minister Vesna Pusic and by myself. Special treatment of Bosnia and Herzegovina and special program for Bosnia and Herzegovina. But minimum of this program must be done in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have, unfortunately, Bosnia and Herzegovina has elites who are nationalistic, Sorry for telling that. That's true. And definitely the relation between elites in Bosnia and Herzegovina can be resolved by only in Bosnia and Herzegovina. No Croatia, no Serbia, no European Union, no United States. No one will resolve your problems but you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Josipović, also for keeping to the time. Next in the lineup, we have Mr. Vesko Garčević, the second speaker. The floor is yours, Mr. Garčević.
Thank you. Regrettably, I have to leave after this, and I have just few minutes left because I have another commitment. I wanted to make a few points briefly, and those points are reflection on what some of discussants said about the role of big powers in the region, and they are like a big power competition. As I mentioned at the beginning, the involvement of big powers can be favorable or disadvantages for the region's aspirations. And region aspiration is to become fully integrated into a European and Euro-Atlantic integration. So some countries, external powers, don't look at this with sympathy, and they, like Russia, actually play on anti-EU and NATO narratives, and promote and play on political actors in the region, which question fundamental values and principles of the EU, and question the need for integration, for example, Euro-Atlantic integrations. But one more point: the whole discussion this morning was not focused on, I agree, on what I expected also to be focused on, but it also reflects the power vacuum that exists in the region, power vacuum that allowed small actors, regional actors, including other actors, to play around with countries from the region. So therefore we have the rise of authoritarianism, therefore we have the rise of nationalism in the region, therefore we have the rise of populism, including countries that are now members of the EU. So countries from the region who are not fully integrated, they think rightly that they will be victims of the big power game and big power competition. And they believe also rightly that integration into Euro-Atlantic integrations and European Union will help them save themselves and allow them to achieve what they really need, is stability and security in order to make their countries, their systems prosperous. If this doesn't happen, then we are risking having another crisis which will spiral out from control by Brussels and Washington. So, and the final point is democratic backsliding is a consequence of regional development, but also European Union has responsibility in it, because the European Union committed itself to the region in 2003. It promised something, and it is also responsible for delivering, as a region is responsible for delivering. It is two-way street. It's not just one-way street. Democratic reforms will happen, and will happen to that extent as the European Union is actively and politically involved in the region. If a European Union keeps process as a technical one, this will not be a good approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garčević, for your contribution and participation in this expert roundtable. Next, we have Mr. Ugrosdy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. One of the questions that kept bothering me throughout this conversation, that somehow we think about the European Union as a form of divine intervention that will all of a sudden reform the internal politics of these countries, which is not true. I mean, if you look at the experience of those EU member states who have joined after 2004, that was not the case. Why it would be similar in the case of countries which will join in the future. So the EU is an important stakeholder, and obviously it's not the only one. And I very much agree with Professor Akin's assessment that we have haven't been really focusing on the great power competition on the Western Balkans. And if I would have to be very strict, I wouldn't even call the EU a great power on global terms. But that's another question. But what I wanted to highlight is that what we see is that all the outside players are following their own rational choices. I mean, why wouldn't we expect China to do those kind of activities that it's doing? That's in line with the Chinese national interest. Same goes for Russia, same goes for Turkey, same goes for others, and also the same goes for the European Union. Everybody's doing their job. And this is not a bad process after all, because this is how international politics work. But what we have to figure out is that how the European Union, and of course I'm coming from an EU member state, so I tend to have a vested interest in EU enlargement, but how the European Union can change this for the better. And the bottom line is that if the package is not appealing enough, and Ambassador Garčević has been talking about this many times, if the EU cannot be believed, then others might come up with a better offer. For example, others might say that, all right, we'll give you money to finance infrastructural developments with no political strings attached. You wouldn't have to get rid of corruption. You don't have to have free elections. You can stay on power. I'll give you the money. Of course, in return, you will be indebted to me for the next 40 years. But this might be a viable and attractive deal to some of the players in the region. And maybe the EU should also reassess its own position when it comes to promoting values and leveraging that with the geopolitical interest. Because the EU can take the moral high ground, holding the Western Balkan countries accountable for the democratic process, but then it's going to lose the geopolitical game because others will come with a more attractive package at the end. And this is the puzzle that Brussels will have to solve in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ugrosdy, also for keeping to time.
Hello, sorry, we cannot hear. We cannot hear anymore. Yeah? Some problem with chair.
Very much. I hope you are able to hear me. Yes? Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know what happened. So let's turn to Mr. Suljagić for his comments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ugrosdy actually took the better part of my concluding remarks, or what they were supposed to be. Now, and the essence of my comments earlier regarding President Josipović was actually that you don't stop being a nationalist by becoming a member of the EU. And I think that what's going on in Croatia and a number of other EU countries is a clear evidence of that. And in that regard, nobody gets to get away with that. That's one thing. The other thing is, yes, there was considerably little conversation about great power competition here, great power competition in the Balkans. But once again, to the extent, let me put it this way: it doesn't mean that great powers were not active in the West, or what you would traditionally understand as great powers, and at least one or two of them have been very active, in a number of vital sectors for every country, let alone a West Balkan country. The issue that seems to me, when it comes to the role of the EU, is kind of an elephant in the room, is that on the back of the immigration crisis, there has been a growing sentiment, and that has been articulated in some corners in Europe, that the societies with either Muslim majorities or sizable Muslim populations, that the EU shouldn't be in a hurry to get them on board. And that has been kind of a, once again, elephant in the room. We haven't discussed that very much. We cannot disregard that. We cannot not rule it out. As far as I'm concerned, speaking as a Bosnian citizen, for a country like Bosnia, and I assume Mr. Garčević can testify to that when it comes to Montenegro, the membership in NATO is actually the NATO is the kind of Western integration that provides stability, and is more important, at least in the short to medium term. We do consider ourselves Europeans. Not really always sure whether the European Union considers us Europeans, but if there is to be short to medium term stability, then the one actor that's missing, and if we, I don't know if we can longer talk about NATO as a unified actor, is actually NATO, and I think that this is something that we should be looking at in the near future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suljagić. And in fact, it is 5 o'clock. I'd like to thank all our participants, the distinguished speakers and distinguished discussants. This conversation provided a lot of food for thought, a lot of new questions, and left many questions unanswered, but I think that is part of the thought-provocative nature of TRT World Forum expert roundtables, rather than answering all the questions, which probably is unrealistic, to open up new questions and provide food for thought for future roundtables and new avenues for conversation. On behalf of TRT World Forum, I thank you all and wish you a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on which time zone you are.
Okay, thank you.